So Canada's startup visa, is this a good option for me? Many people were recommending the start visa to you, right? And would that be a good option in your case? Well, click here in the link in the description of this video. We help businesses of different sizes at different stages in this journey to success in Canada. One important thing I need to say is that our company, we are not immigrant consultants or immigrant lawyers. So we're not here to give you immigration advice. Our focus is on the success of your business, okay? So our conversation here with you about the startup visa is about how that makes sense from the standpoint of your business being successful, okay? So one important thing is to understand, why was the startup visa created? Many people believe that the startup visa is a very solid path towards the permanent residency in Canada. And that is true in many cases, but there are a few things you need to be careful about. The original intent of this visa was to attract entrepreneurs that found challenging to get permanent residency in the United States. So there were a number of companies, startups in the US by foreigners. These companies were starting by people who were not permanent residents of the United States. And when it came time to get a permanent visa, a permanent residency in the US, it was challenging. So Canada saw that as an opportunity and created a path, say, hey, we need people, right? We have more people die in Canada than are born every year. So we need to bring smart people to generate economic growth. So they saw as these entrepreneurs that were starting businesses in the US as a great pool of people to be attracted. Okay, so that was the original intent of the startup visa. But how was it implemented? If you think about a startup is very different from a traditional, well-established business. When you get other categories of visas like the intra-company transfer and many others, they rely on the historical financial success of the company. You take the last 3 years of financial statements and you show the stability, the profitability, the strong balance sheet, and all that kind of stuff. Startup is pretty hard because the company may not even exist yet, or may just be in the proof of concept on the minimum viable product. So how do you assess if that business is going to be successful or not? So the government bureaucracy certainly finds it challenging to assess that type of situation. It's not clear-cut, go and check the tax documents for the last few years and see, sure, this is a viable business. So what the government did was something very smart. It outsourced and delegated the decision and the analysis to people who have the technical expertise, right? And who are these institutions, these people? Are incubators and investors. So business incubators, some investors groups, what they do is that they assess the viability of a business plan. And then if they agree and they see that it may be viable, they will issue a support letter. And with that support letter issued by an accredited institution, the government is going to say, okay, let's issue the startup visa then to this individual because the analysis has been done. So great idea, right? And in the beginning, it used to be very quick, used to be very cheap, relatively, right? So because there was not a lot of people that heard about the startup visa originally, so the program was there, recently established, and there was a lot of capacity to deal with it. Well, that's changed a lot, and that's what you should know now. What happened is that many people were redirected to this path of the startup visa from other types of visas that became perhaps harder for these people to obtain. And because a startup, right, sometimes, yes, you have an innovative technology. That's what the intent of the visa is, something very innovative, very disruptive, very well thought, very well planned, supported with financial resources, with talent, and with technology. So the idea is that. But it's also, you also have in that pool a lot of things that, like you don't know really how viable and how strong the support is. So what ended up happening is that the startup visa got a lot of people going there with a big, wide gap of quality, let's say, of the business cases and the business plans and the viability of the business. And it became much harder for people issuing the support letters to actually assess which ones are going to make it, which ones are not going to make it, because you got this big inflow, a lot of volume of cases coming your way that you have now to analyze very quickly. Remember, all these institutions, when they issue the support letter, they essentially are assuming a responsibility in front of the Canadian government, of the Ministry of Immigration, saying, hey, yes, we have done our homework and we support this. And these things are taken very seriously in Canada. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with issuing a support letter. And in order to support this responsibility, these people have to do a lot of homework. So essentially, the analysis of the business cases started to get more detailed. The sheer volume of people needing that, wanting to follow that path, made these institutions need to really build infrastructure to analyze all those cases. And all that costs money. So what ended up happening is two things that impact. So if you are thinking about coming to Canada on a startup visa and you're talking to somebody who came 4 years ago, probably your experience now is going to be very different from that one that the people had in two main ways. The first one is that it became much more expensive because you need to finance all this infrastructure now that is analyzing, assessing, and issuing the support letters. And it's hard. You have to hire people. People have to work on that because you have the responsibility with the government to assess and recommend the right businesses, right? So it became more expensive. And the second thing, it takes much longer now. Back in the day when this visa started, it was just a matter of a few months, everything was done. And now it takes longer, like before in the early days, maybe within 12 months, you would have your permanent residency. And progressively over time, it became a year and a half. Of course, COVID didn't help, but then became a year and a half, then became 2 years, 2 years and a half, and 3 years and more. So in order to have actually the permanent residency, as you know, if you're interested in the startup visa, you probably already know that it's a two-step process. You first get your work permit that you can come to Canada right away and start to work while your permanent residency is processed. So the reason why a lot of people decided to follow the startup visa is that it seemed to provide a much more solid and quicker and cheaper path to the permanent residency. While a lot of these things are not true anymore, it's certainly not necessarily quicker, not cheaper for sure. And in many cases, it's not even that certain because, of course, the more sheer volume, the more detailed the criteria has to be to select and filter the right opportunities. Okay, I'm not an expert in this, but you do find opinion about experts in a link we're sharing here in the description. It's an article actually that was posted in the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association discussing these points. From our standpoint here at Lucalex, where our job is to help you make sure you build a successful business in Canada, what we see as being a challenge in this startup visa idea is that the future profits of your startup is going to have to sustain and support the financial viability of this business in Canada. So how do we make sure, or how do we recognize the risks, prepare for them, and take the steps to be successful? So that the goal, remember, is not just get the permanent residency, move to Canada, because these things change all the time. All these immigration programs, they can change along the way. I mean, suddenly the next thing you see, you submitted all the paperwork, it's been a year and a half, and then now the program is something different, and you thought you were going to qualify, you don't anymore. But what always works, this is what's important. There are a few things that will always work no matter what's the scenario. Two things. The first thing that always works is when the business plan is solid. You thought about your value proposition. You thought about your market. You understand how you're going to achieve that market, and you have a well thought and well-defined plan for that. You understand what it takes for you to deliver that value to your clients. And of course, you have the financial base from which all these things cost money that you have to build, and you have the financial base. So when there are outside sources of money to the business, that increases the probability of success a lot, because all of you here who have worked in businesses before, you know there's a lot of uncertainty in business. You know, you may have the best plan in the world, and then something changes and suddenly you're not able to deliver the results you thought. So if that ever happens to one of the startups, it's important to have this outside source of funds so that the business doesn't have to rely only on future profits to stay alive. There's a link here in the description. Click it to have more information about how we can help. Thank you very much.